Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm Sean Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to MindYourFarmBusiness.com. Have you ever heard the phrase, "It's lonely at the top"? Being the leader can be very lonely and isolating. Many times, we want the leader to be stoic, where nothing appears to bother or faze them. The leader must be strong to keep up morale and give the group confidence. Meanwhile, in the leader's head, they're buzzing and going 1,000 miles an hour, dealing with all the leader's burden and decision-making and leadership that has to happen. What if you had the opportunity to share your struggles, your key decisions, or biggest wins with a group of people that are like-minded and going through exactly what you are? Peer groups are that answer. Peer groups can be a fantastic place to do exactly all of this. Today's topic on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast is all about peer groups and how they can be a very effective resource for even the most experienced of leaders. Today's guest is Evan Shout. Evan has been a participant in business peer groups himself and now leads 2 groups focused in agriculture. Maverick Ag specializes in consulting, speaking, and risk management. Let's get to the conversation and talk about peer groups with Evan Shout of Maverick Ag. Hey, Evan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Well, welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. I'm looking forward to today's discussion because we're going to dive deep into the power of peer groups. And this is something that I know you're pretty passionate about. You're putting together your own program for peer groups in agriculture, but you've also yourself, as a business person, been involved in peer groups as a participant. So you're kind of seeing it from all angles. From a business person's perspective, which farmers are, this is a business. What's the benefit of being in a peer group?
So I find most of the benefit is as entrepreneurs, we've all made enough mistakes over the years. And what I find the best thing about the peer groups is that the transparency, assuming that you can get enough guys to speak and enough sharing, you learn how to cut some of those mistakes off before they happen on your operation. That was probably the biggest payoff for us, is just learning from guys who have been there before, who maybe have expanded before us, who've gotten bigger before us. And it's given us that roadmap so that maybe we can avoid some of the pitfalls. Obviously, you're not going to avoid them all, but you avoid 1 or 2 a year. That adds up over a lifespan.
And is it kind of the realization that maybe there's an issue you're struggling with, trying to sort out, try to put this puzzle together. In agriculture, there's a lot of it's a big puzzle. It's more than 1,000 pieces, and you realize that you're not the only one going through some of those same challenges. That to me would be something that would come to light very quickly.
Yeah, it definitely brings that front and center. The big part, especially in agriculture that we've talked about it before, is the mental health aspect of ag. And what I found with peer groups is you do realize, as you said, that everybody has the same issues. And honestly, the number I've been in, it doesn't matter if you're a 5,000 acre, a 10,000 or 20,000 acre farmer. The issues are still the same. There's just a few more zeros behind the answers. So
yeah.
What it's done is it's literally given a whole group of guys, the chance to speak up, the chance to be heard, and have some of their peer group actually who've done it before or who are having the same issues collaboratively come up with solutions.
So Evan, from your experience, what makes a great peer group? There's you can be in an okay peer group. They're not all fantastic, but what's the difference between a good peer group and a great one?
To tell you the truth, I think the biggest difference is who you have running it. So I've been a part of a few peer groups where you never really had anybody in charge. So it was just come together, pick a few topics, and everybody kind of shares. The best peer groups I've been a part of are run more like a coaching program almost. You have a mediator at the front of the room, and all they're there to do is keep things on track, get rid of the tangents. But B, the biggest thing is just kind of cut off the collaborative, thought together. They cut it off at the pass, because once you find in peer groups is you'll get a solution from one person and everybody just kind of jumps on board and that's a great solution. That's not really what you want. You want a whole bunch of different options, and you want guys to share what they're doing on their operation so that as a group you can come up with the best answer, not just the first one, right?
That makes a lot of sense. What would you identify as the characteristics of a peer group not worth being in?
For me, the ones that I've been in and exited, the main ones were you have a whole bunch of introverts. And I mean, in life, we've got extroverts, we have introverts, but if you're going to be part of a peer group, you almost have to be a forced introvert or forced extrovert if you're going to be. Because if you're in a peer group where nobody's actually sharing and only one person's doing most of the talking, it'll really curb the motivation to keep doing it. The other thing we've noticed is I've been in a few peer groups where I was the one who just was talking more than everybody else. And from my perspective, I don't get a lot of value when I'm not getting the sharing, from the other members of the group.
Yeah. And there's different tiers of sharing. You and I have chatted about this before when you've been a guest on Real Ag Radio. There's like people that share maybe their opinion, their perspective, but I think the best word is vulnerability. And that's where like there's trust that's involved in that. But if the peer group gets to that level where people can really be vulnerable, that's where there's real value.
Yeah, like what we've done is, on our phone, we've run the EOS system, the Entrepreneur Operating System. And the main aspect of that is just open, honest, and vulnerable. And as an internal, that's been the best communication we have. So when you apply it to peer groups, if you can get one where everybody is open, honest, and vulnerable, and it's not a competition thing, and you don't have neighbors who aren't sharing because they're worried about, what the next land deal might be in terms of competition, it really boosts what you're going to learn. Because like you said, vulnerability is probably one of the biggest aspects, is that you have to be able to be part of it and know that maybe you're not the smartest in the room and we're not perfect, but still bring up the topics and try and get solutions for your operation.
Is it from a frequency of discussion standpoint, is this something that happens annually, quarterly, monthly? What kind of frequency do you think is ideal?
I think from my aspect, and especially with agriculture, you kind of place it around the growing season. So you try to get one in early spring, kind of before you hit the seeding machinery window, which gets you kind of thinking about risk management, and it gets you into the year and strategic planning and kind of what guys are doing in terms of crop rotation, commodity marketing. It's kind of a motivational start to the year, kind of get it down on paper before you get busy. In the summer, I like one in July or August, and more so just for a catch up. So it's okay, we've gone through seeding. What issues have we all come across? What's the industry done in that, that 4 months since we met? And it just a refresher to get guys, if they are having a hard year, it gives them the opportunity to be transparent. And if they're having a great year and what they're doing well, it just gives more sharing, right? And then the last one I would put post-harvest, November, December, and it's more or less a recap. And what we like to say is it's what did we learn? Because you go through a year and we only get to put in one crop a year, and a good farming career, hopefully somewhere between 40 and 60 years. So you only get 60 chances at this. So with that low of odds, you want to make sure that you do a debrief and go through the year and figure out, what were our victories, what were our weaknesses, and see what everybody else's were so that you can avoid those going forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We'll get back to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, but first a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. Maybe you've had an idea about upgrading your operation, or finally getting that renovation done, or buying some new equipment. Or you want to be a little less reliant on the weather from season to season. Get some help making it happen by speaking with an RBC Agriculture account manager. Then, set up an investment plan to make even more of your ideas happen. Visit rbc.com/chartyourcourse and get started today.
Now, you can be in peer groups that are in the vertical of agriculture where everybody is a farmer. And then there's also the opportunity to join peer groups where maybe other people around the table, you're the farmer, but other people around the table may be in the energy industry or telecom or consulting, HR. There can be benefits to that too. How do you balance that off between in the farmer vertical, like in the agriculture vertical only, versus being exposed to other industries?
Yeah, so we've done this even on our advisory boards for both Maverick and Hebert Grain Ventures. We've gone outside of the industry and brought in other business people to have on our advisory boards, strictly because what you're going to notice is if you're running your farm like a business, every business has the same issues or concepts that come up during the year. So it's nice to have an outside the industry experience, which then gives you a whole bunch of information that, you know, your peer group inside agriculture may not have thought of. And I mean, we do strategic coach out to Toronto, and it's the same aspect as I'm the only farmer out of the 30 that are in my group, but it gives me a full day of sitting there and listening to everybody else's stories and working on businesses rather than in, because what you'll find is that they're all the same. We treat agriculture different, but in terms of business, it's no different than a construction company in Toronto or a vacation company in Mexico. They all are looking for profitability, and they all have issues.
Yeah. And there's for me personally, I like the bounce, like sort of like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, and creating this program in my business. We're thinking about expanding this way, or I'm thinking about putting this program in place for team members that are a part of this business. And you kind of get that feedback where it's like, oh, before you do that, I would consider this, right? I was going through this exact same issue 5 years ago. Here's where I messed up. That's the part where you it's not free consulting, because usually you got to pay to be in a peer group, but it's pretty cheap consulting because you're getting people that have actually gone through it and they've experienced it, and they're gonna share some of those pitfalls to save yourself some grief.
Yeah, it definitely gets your bias out of it. So what I find is internally, when you work in the business so much, you'll make decisions and you're pretty sure that they're correct, and you don't actually throw around other solutions. You just take the first one you came with. Where in a peer group, what you'll find is if you bring that up, you're going to get 19 other options or issues, or, you'll get the SWOT analysis or the pros and cons of what you're doing, which then most likely in most instances leads you either to take your decision and make it better, or even go off in a whole different way. So it definitely brings about a whole bunch of group thought, which is better than just yourself, right?
Is it for everybody though? Is a peer group like it? There's a lot of people listening to this, and maybe they're in one, maybe they're interested, maybe they thought about it, just haven't pulled the trigger. Maybe this is the first time they're hearing about it. Is it for everybody?
I would say be prepared to put in as much as you want out. So what I mean by that is it's probably not for everybody. And I mean, in agriculture, I know we have this rugged individualism theory where, we win by ourselves and we lose by ourselves. And for guys who focus on that, it's probably not going to be worth their while, just because, as I said, you have to participate. And honestly, the more you participate, the more you're going to get back. And there's a lot of peer groups where I'll leave that day and it's mentally draining, because you've spent, 3, 4, 5 hours sitting there and discussing things and sharing. And it's not an easy thing to be part of. So I would say just the first thing is just be prepared that you're going to get out what you put in. So make sure you're on board.
Yeah. I think there's lots of opportunities in this industry to talk about and share ideas about agronomics, as an example. Or if you're ranching, like, calving practices, like the things that we love to do, the things we're really, really good at. And we're kind of comfortable talking to even our neighbors about it. Right. But then there's topics that, let's be honest, we kind of really avoid. Succession planning is a good example. I think in general, finances is something that many farmers are for sure not publicly, and sometimes even privately inside the nuclear family unit, talking about. That's like, those are two examples that come to mind where you could really learn from other people in the group in terms of strategies, ideas, things to avoid. The stuff that we don't talk about, and we put off, and we say next year, You know, when planting's over, we'll get to it. That's where that's where the topics where I really think if you're into this idea, you could really, really launch yourself forward. Am I hitting on something there?
Yeah, and I think that's where the whole mediator or having somebody in charge of the group comes in. Is most of the peer groups that I've either run or been a part of, the group will actually give me a list of topics, or they'll give me, an idea of what they want to cover during the session. And I'll take that list and I'll do homework and I'll bring about a whole bunch of, what some of my other consulting farms are doing in transparency. And it allows me to run it. So by running it, I then can push some of those topics that, like you said, if you leave these guys in the room by themselves, they're probably not going to bring up because they're uncomfortable. Where if you allow somebody else to run the group and they touch on a topic such as succession or such as finance, so one of those items where maybe the guys in the room aren't the smartest at, so they kind of tend to shy away from them, then all of a sudden it's front and center and you're forced into it. The other thing I find is, in the quote we use quite a bit, is you don't know what you don't know. So by looking at that, essentially having somebody else bring about a topic or bring about something or a new way of doing something, it just expands your mindset, right?
Yeah, that, you've brought up the mediator several times, piercing down to the real issue, right? Like that's asking the right questions, or calling you on your BS and saying, you're saying this is the cause. Have you thought about this? Like, that's where that person that's mediating the group, the leader of the group, that's where I can see how that make or breaks the experience.
And to tell you the truth, it's a skill. Like I've been part with some mediators that kind of just sit back and, let you go. And then I've been part of groups where, like you said, they'll actually call you out on some of your BS. And when you get a guy who's that into it and somebody who's willing to lead that strongly, it just makes the experience 10 times better. And it will force those conversations, and it will bring out a whole bunch of things on the vulnerable side and the emotional side that need to come out in order for your peer group to actually be successful.
Evan, are there any examples where it could hurt your business, be a disservice to you at all? I'm just trying to make sure we cover this from all the different angles and the considerations to make sure we give everybody. Are there negatives to this at all?
I think you just got to be aware that your definition of success is probably different than everybody else sitting in that peer group. I mean, if you got 20 guys or 10 guys in a peer group, all of them have 10 vastly different operations, and what they want is vastly different. So you might have one that is looking to expand or take on acres, or you got one that's looking at retirement and succession, or the 2,000 acre guy that's a hobby farmer and just likes being in the industry. You just have to remember going into a peer group that you are in charge of your success. So make sure you take from it what applies to your operation. Don't try and follow the footsteps of everybody else, because that's where guys get in trouble. Is they sit in a peer group and they hear, well, you should be expanding, this very strongly. And then they go out and buy land at a high price, and maybe that wasn't what they actually wanted to do. So it's make sure you know what you're, part of the peer group for.
The keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. Not being comfortable in your own skin or having a good idea what you really want out of your business. That's actually that's even true just outside of the peer group period, right? I think that's something probably something we should talk about in the future on Mind Your Farm Business is what your goal setting long term for your business and your family. I think that's actually a really, really good point, how the peer group kind of weaves into that potentially, because you're spending so much intimate time with other people that are in the group, right?
Well, and you're allowing other people to tell you what success is. And I mean, success is not the same for everybody. So it's making sure before going into the group, you know what you want to take out of this, and then that you focus on those. Don't just focus on the aspects that are bright and shiny kind of thing.
Yeah, great stuff. Hey, Evan, really appreciate you joining us here for the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. All the best to you, and good luck to everything you're doing with Farmer Coach.
You bet. Thank you, Sean.
Honestly, I used to hear about peer groups all the time, but I really didn't think much of them. I mean, they sound, expensive, and they kind of sound great, but I was always doubtful that they had much of an impact. Somehow, for some unique and coincidental reasons, I ended up in a business peer group for the past 14 months. I can tell you that my perceptions were completely wrong. The ability to delve deep into issues I'm dealing with in my business, maybe personally, with a group of people that are dealing with the exact same thing creates a strong bond. The payoff has been amazing for our business and myself. I encourage you to give business peer groups a try and see the benefits of working together with your peers. Your business and, quite frankly, your staff will thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If you have any feedback or comments, please email me at shaney@realagriculture.com or call the Real Ag listener line at 855-776-6147. You can find more episodes of Mind Your Farm Business podcast at mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Thanks to RBC Royal Bank, and until next time, keep on minding your farm business.